victims have different timescales and different things they want in those timescales. And they make the point, a rushed approach to reconciliation will almost certainly be counterproductive. There's a need to balance reconciliation with retributive justice. Tina Rosenberg makes this comment. If the victims in a society do not feel that their suffering has been acknowledged, then they are not ready to put the past behind them. If they know that the horrible crimes carried out in secret will always remain buried, then they are not ready for reconciliation. The kind of reconciliation that lets bygones be bygones is not true reconciliation. It is, in fact, reconciliation at the gunpoint and should not be confused with the real thing. One of the other points that IDEA comes up with is that the role of memory is very important, the importance of remembering things, but they also make the point that this is complex. Society has to actually maintain or attain a right, delicate balance between remembering and forgetting. Other situations that have existed in the world show that time does not heal all wounds, and sometimes memories can turn toxic generations later, centuries later. We saw that, for example, in the Balkans, where memories, certain categories of memories, the bad thing memories, were the only things ever remembered, and they toxicified. But on the other hand, to forget them is also a negative. And Rwanda has gone through its own process of how to do that. And so I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about some of those aspects. The government itself set up a National Unity and Reconciliation Commission to try and deal with all the issues that had taken place. And it had its objectives to be a harmonizing of the country. If you go to its website and you look at the site that it talks about, they want to do this for the economic well-being of the country and the social well-being, but essentially they know they're doing it for the reconciling. And they do a number of different programs, or support a number of different programs. But what I found particularly powerful were some of the community-based programs and the programs that were evolved within Rwanda. Now, we know that situations of lack of reconciliation can be widely different in the character that they have. And so something that works somewhere is not automatically going to work somewhere else. And if you don't have a climate where homegrown approaches can take place, then you may be denying your own community resilience from flourishing. And this website talks about such things as Ingando, solidarity camps, civil education activities that facilitated the smooth reintegration of former refugees, provisionally released prisoners back to their communities. And I can tell you, when I saw this vast number in Zaire, now Congo, coming back in to Rwanda, some 2 to 2.5 years later, this was a massive logistical task, just simply in terms of the physical needs. But such things as this are actually trying to get to the next stage, that if they are to come back in, that they can come back in a truly reintegrated way. And there was another one here, Valerie, that I have no idea of this pronunciation. Itorero Ri Igihugu. Thank you. This is another homegrown initiative inspired by Rwandan culture that was formerly a traditional Rwandan school model to instill moral values of integrity and a capacity to deal with one's problems. And so that's been another local characteristic that has been capitalized on. And you did mention, I just heard you when I came back in, the
homemade solutions.
Yeah, homemade solutions, that's right. And the gachacha,
yes.
And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment.
Yeah.
The abunzi, where community reconcilers resolve day-to-day conflicts before they go to courts. In other words, to try and avoid them going to courts. And then there were such things of a physical nature, an economic well-being nature, the girinka, 1 cow per family. Girinka.
Yes.
In the culture of Rwanda, cows have a special place as a symbol of wealth, love and unity, and the program was initiated by President Paul Kagame, aiming at ending malnutrition, poverty, strengthening and social cohesion. By the way, there's one aspect, often after a genocide, what happens next can often be starvation. because there has been such destruction of the infrastructure and the natural environment that there's no food now to feed those who have survived the trauma of the genocide. Rwanda was actually saved that, because Rwanda, if you see photographs of it, is a very, very fertile country, densely populated, but very fertile. And so there was not, in fact, mass starvation, though it did need food security support. Now, the issue of justice. The world came in to help and established the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. They felt it was important not to establish it in Rwanda, though it does have offices in Rwanda. The actual tribunal hearings are in Arusha. It took some time for this tribunal to get underway, and the United Nations has set timelines for it to wind itself up. There was initially a timeline of 2012, and now the timeline has been extended, I think, to the end of this year, and we'll see if it finishes there. So far, the tribunal has finished 50 trials and convicted 29 persons. Another 11 trials are in progress, and 14 individuals are waiting trial in detention. And there are others that will be transferred back to the Rwandan court system. 50 trials, 29 convictions, and the numbers that I've just spoken about, for a death toll of 800,000. Clearly, that has not been able to be a major means of establishing the justice framework that needs to happen. So in that context, the homegrown method that Valerie talked about, the Gacaca courts, have become very important indeed. And the bishop writes about this. The courts began in 2003. So this was about 6-7 years after the International Tribunal was established. And it was a way of the community to work together to say, we have to do something. This is taking too long for us to identify those who perpetrated the crimes and to deal, and how we deal with that. So he writes, they began in 2003 as a way for the community to work together to investigate and reveal the truth about genocide. Gacaca is the name of the grass that grows in the community compounds, he writes. Historically, Rwandans would sit there to testify and work out their problems. When there was a grudge between people, they came together and sat on the grass around the compound to discuss it. Reminds me a little bit, we know in the Westminster system we talk about the House of Commons. People often think the Commons refers to, they were the common people, because it seems to be the opposite of the House of Lords. In fact, the House of Commons doesn't take its name from the common people. It takes its name from the commons upon which the original tribes and First Nations of Britain met. The elders would meet on the common. So a bit similar to the situation here with the Gacaca. They had little, the people around realised they had little control over what was taking place in Arusha in Tanzania. And it was happening very slowly, but even if it happened quicker, they still had no control. It was not within their ownership. So they decided the government decided to hold their own courts in the old-fashioned way by having a tribunal of people from each area hear the testimony of local people and questioning those under suspicion. And they began it in a few villages on an experimental basis, but ultimately it proved so successful they extended it to most villages around the country. Now, anyone who attends, apparently, these tribunals, from a village elder through to the youngest child, has the right to question the person who is under cross-examination. This helps, as the bishop wrote, to people to unearth the truth, to overcome denial, and to move towards repentance. The community remembers what happened. People do not forget something that their hearts remind them of every single day. The pain and the guilt make them remember vividly. And I believe this process has been a very important one of helping bring reconciliation between victim and perpetrator. There have been many other things that have taken place, of course, too, and John Stewart, the work that he was doing, was looking at some of these things. People were encouraged. Rwanda is a 95% Christian country. People were encouraged to write down the things that burdened their heart. And they would be encouraged sometimes to take them to their church and to nail them to a cross. And then they would be taken off the cross and they'd be burnt. And the ashes would be ceremonially disposed of. I mentioned it as a Christian country, 95%. But I often tell the story of the Good Samaritan in the Rwandan context. Because in the Rwandan context, there was one group that did not take place in the slaughter of Tutsis, that actually protected Tutsis as well, and this was the Muslim community of Rwanda. Albeit only 5% of the whole population, they stood back from the slaughter, sometimes at their own cost. So as I say, I tell it as a Good Samaritan story, because the Good Samaritan was a reviled person in that story of the parable. Well, here in a country that was basically Christian, they chose not to follow Christian precepts, and one group did, or follow the precepts of integrity. But one of the points I mentioned before was the issue of not forgetting, remembering what had happened. And so another program was introduced, Kwibuka. Yeah. And this is the act of remembering. Kwibuka means remember. Yes. Okay. In the Rwandese. It describes an annual commemoration that takes place following the 1994 genocide of the Tutsis. And so each year they will have a special time in the country and internationally. Yeah. They will have ceremonies, commemorations right around the globe. To remember, namely, when you see the word remember there, to honour the memory of those who died and offering support of those who survived, to those who survived. To unite, to show that Rwanda shows that reconciliation through shared human values is possible, and ask the world to do the same. To renew, to build Rwanda anew, and to enable them to have a future where the landmines of history are not planted in the road. Now, it is only 20 years. That is really not a long time in the process of history. There had been, in the space of 1960 to 1994, there had been various flare-ups. But I think we can see by the evidence of what has happened in Rwanda, yes, it has had government support and encouragement and even initiative, but in the end, it has been people at the community level that have made the difference. Because whether they intentionally knew they were doing it or not, they understood the point made by Antoine Ruther-Sahiri that they were not separate from the other. They were neighbours with the other. And unless they did that, it would not work. Now, I think this is a live link. If I click on it, let's see it. Subtitle.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, sorry about that. No, well, I didn't do the advance first, so I was doing this.
Rob, is Rob here? Do you know how to handle the... I think, yeah. Do you want to help me?
Thanks.
Lecture didn't hear enough. So it's actually being placed. And but here we go. The device will be unmuted.
It's traditional with the host.
Should be unmuted.
Honestly, you can see stuff.
There we go. So now if you go back to the start.
All right.
I think it takes several seconds.
Kiapan. Pourquoi kwibuka c'est important?
kwibuka ni ingenzi ni ngombwa ndetse n'itegeko ntegekwa n'urukundo rw'abandi.
Tugomba kwibuka abacu bo baziye jenoside bityo bikatwohereza umutima
Kugira ngo dukire kuko kwibuka biradukiza.
Bwa kabiri tugayicyubahiro abasi.
Iyo twibuka aho twavuye kandi iyo twibuka aho twavuye dukomeza icyerekezo cy'aho tujya.
twajyaga twibuka bakava umunsi wo kurira tukirirwa mu gisukari ariko ubu tugeze mu gihe cyo kwibuka twiyubaka.
What I can say to the Rwandan people as a son of survivor of Holocaust, that the most important thing is to do what my father did and look forward and look to the future.
Utazi yapfuye yavuye ntamenya n'iyaje. Kwibuka ni ukugira ngo tumenye iyo twavuye tumenye iyo turi.
Umuryango twibuka ntabwo ushobora kubona.
Ugomba kwibuka ariko ugana mu nzira nziza tukegera abandi kandi tukeneye inyubako.
Hanyuma no gufasha n'ahandi hose ibyo ngibyo byaba bigiye kubafasha kugira ngo nabo ibyatubwiriye nabo bidashobora kuba byabona.
Luca is in fact an instrument of advancing.
It is our duty to remember them. And for us to be able to remember, we must teach every child in every school in Africa. Kubuka means remembrance, means memorial. But perhaps above all, it also means learning.
Kwibuka reminds us of the tragedy that befell this country, but also the resilience of the nation in rising above this tragedy.
Having 9 shaky dogs, I would let us be back there in Rwanda to just be with you all on this important remembrance. From here on the streets of London, my thoughts are with you all in Kigali and across Rwanda. Kwibuka, remember.
Aujourd'hui, nous souvenons du grand Rwandais. Je suis de tout cœur avec vous. Je salue votre courage et votre détermination pour aller de l'avant. De Paris, je vous dis Kwibuka, je me souviens.
Rwanda is a model for everyone in the power of hope and healing, of resilience and determination. By placing your shared humanity above your grievances and differences, you honor the memory of all your fallen countrymen, and you inspire all of us as well.
Tugomba kwibuka.
Remember?
Kwibuka,
Remember. Kwibuka. Kwibuka.
Kwibuka, remember.
So, that is the journey so far of Rwanda. So, I don't know if there are any questions of Valerie and myself. Yes, there's a question there, and then one up the back. Thanks, Wacky.
Okay, can you give them the microphone?
Okay.
Thank
This
you.
is the first Q&A. Use it. Thank you.
Thank you both. I actually missed most of the others. I must have shown this. Unavoidably. So I don't know if this was mentioned earlier, but I'd like to know, my understanding is that there are still hundreds of thousands of Rwandan refugees, which I assume are Hutu, still in the Congo. Is that true? And if so, are there any moves to bring them back? As I understand, many hundreds of thousands of people have come back.
Yeah, I'll just to answer. Rwanda has.
Sorry, we need the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need the microphone.